Hello and welcome. I'm Erica Barajas, a printmaking artist in Oakland, California, here in the United States. I'm here today to talk with Israel Campos, Amy Burek, and Barbara Kibbe. Each of these artists participated in the eMERGE Print Exchange, a portfolio and exhibition I started organizing in 2021 with the support of a membership engagement grant from the California Society of Printmakers. The full exhibition is viewable now online, and you can find it via the link in the description for this video. Let me tell you just a little bit about each of today's guests. Israel Campos is an interdisciplinary California-born artist currently living and working in the Tongva Nation territory known as Los Angeles. He earned his MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and currently teaches at Los Angeles Pacific College. His work is in the permanent collections of the Kohler Art Library, the UCSC Digital Art Research Center, the Zuckerman Museum of Art, and the Oregon College of Art and Craft. He joined the California Society of Printmakers in 2020. Welcome, Israel. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the introduction. Pleasure being here. So I am primarily trained in printmaking. However, I do also work with painting, bookmaking, and a lot of different processes. So one of the ideas that spurred this piece that I submitted to eMERGE was a result of all my interests kind of coinciding. So one of the interests that I've really gotten into lately has been color. I've been obsessed with color, again, especially as I've been painting more and more. So one of the challenges that I've been trying to solve is how do I introduce color to my work? So one of the ways that I was able to do that was with experimenting with mokuhanga, which is what the piece that I submitted is. However, one of the things that I wanted to explore was, again, combining different techniques. So the line work and the blacks are all etching, aqua tint. So I, again, through the experimentation process and just playing around with different materials, I was able to combine the etching with the mokuhanga. And again, it gave me the ability to really play around with color and just kind of really experiment with that. So in terms of subject-wise, one of the things that I've been very mindful about more and more has been just the devastating wildfire season that we've been having in California. So I'm unfortunately used to expecting in the summer we're going to get big fires. There's going to be a lot of smoke. The sun's going to be red. So I wanted to maybe not be so like complacent about it, maybe like speak about it, address it in the work. And this is what the piece that I submitted is meant to address. Again, black smoke rising. Yes, again, it's been a pleasure to participate in the project and to, again, share the culmination of the research that I've been doing in terms of material and subject. So thank you for that. It's been great.
Well, thank you so much, Israel. It's great to hear more about your background and your work. And thank you for being a part of the project. All right, we're going to move on to Amy. Amy Burek is a scientist and artist living in Alameda, California. She and I met through the Compound Studios here in Oakland, where I'm filming from today. When she was moving out to a different space, she generously gifted me some of the screen printing equipment that I use to create my eMERGE print. She currently co-operates a collaborative risograph studio in the East Bay called Shoot Studio. Her work has been collected by the Whitney Museum, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and the New York Public Library, among others. Thanks for being here today, Amy.
I am in Alameda and worked at a few different group studios over the years. And when I first got into printmaking, I was doing a lot of letterpress and silkscreen and working primarily in the form of a book. And as time has gone on, I've shifted a lot of my practice into a printmaking method known as risograph, which is a sort of automated version of silkscreen printing. The machine itself looks very similar to a photocopier, and it was originally designed as an office copy machine. But because of the way it prints and the way that it uses color, it's also a really interesting method to use oh, here's the cat. Um, for working in multiples such as books and prints. And Shoot Studio was founded right before the pandemic. My fellow artist, Zach Clark, and we purchased a new risograph machine together with the hope of running our own studio space. We bought it in January 2019. I think we finally had it in our hands late January, early February 2020. And then the pandemic kind of swept through. So we're still kind of realizing what we want to make out of that space. But for the piece in the eMERGE print exchange, it's one of the first pieces I've actually been able to make using that new printer. So it was great to have I don't know, something specific to work on, because my personal practice has slowed down quite a bit since the pandemic started. I was home for a significant amount of time with my son, who had just turned 3 before the pandemic started. So a lot of my energy right now is helping him transition in his life. So I definitely jumped at an opportunity to do something concrete and something collaborative. So this project came into being at just the right time for me.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about Nature is Healing?
So I originally have a background in the sciences. I studied molecular biology in school, and I worked for a number of years in biotech, and transitioned out of that part of my career a few years ago. But it's something that definitely does come back up in my work a lot. And so I kind of keep coming back to themes of science and technology. And COVID has really created an interesting, so much is happening in medicine and in technology right now as everyone adjusts. Early on, I got kind of fixated on the meme of nature is healing, like especially in those early days of the pandemic, when people would show like, oh, water's getting cleaner, the air's cleaner, and maybe humans are the problem. And it was an interesting shift in perspective, because I feel like more than 2 years ago, if you said the phrase nature is healing, you would think about how human beings going into nature is healing for them. And the whole idea kind of got flipped on its head at like, well, maybe only nature can heal when humans don't enter it. So I kind of wanted to explore those two ideas simultaneously.
Thanks for sharing that with us. It's so interesting to hear what's behind these works. All right, let's hear from Barbara. Barbara Kibbe is a printmaking and textile artist with a background in law and nonprofit work. She has a BA in art with a special concentration in printmaking, and she joins us today from her studio in Pacifica. She currently has several pieces on tour. The chorus is at a show called Musica at the Texas Quilt Museum, and another piece called The Shadow of Manzanar is in a show called Stitch in California, currently at the Maloof Foundation in Southern California. I want to thank Barbara for jumping in to join the project when a previous artist had to drop out. She really saved the day with that. Thank you for lending us your time today, Barbara. Would you like to tell us more about yourself and your print?
Love to. And thank you for letting me jump in late. I have been a long-term member of the Studio Art Quilt Associates, which is a professional association for art quilters. And only recently was juried in as a member of the California Society of Printmakers. So I just joined last year and didn't learn about the eMERGE print exchange opportunity in time to be timely with my own application. So Erica, thank you for being so flexible and holding me as an alternate. I was very taken by the theme, because I feel after so many years of pursuing a different career, I'm back to the path not taken. So in a way, I'm re-emerging as a printmaker after, let me just say, decades. And I also felt that this would be a great opportunity for me to explore the layers of imagery that are possible now that really weren't possible when I was an art student. In the middle 70s, I said that out loud. We used acid and zinc plates and dangerous solvents, and only were just beginning to explore the idea of working with collagraphs and built plates and different kinds of materials. So coming back to printmaking in a serious way just a few years ago and discovering the wealth of both safer ways to print, but also the influence of digital was really compelling to me. And because I had a very short time, because I was kind of late to the party, I had to be concerned about how quickly something would dry. So I'll talk more about that when we get to the technical question. But my image is essentially the same image used digitally and through screen printing and block printing. And I call it morphed in translation because it's essentially from my library of textures that I morphed and layered and stitched, which makes then reference to my art quilting background as well.
Thank you so much. Actually, you alluded to this. Our next question for the panel is going to be, what are some challenges that you encountered in the printing process? Barbara, would you like to go ahead and tell us some more about that?
Yeah, well, plenty. First of all, I hadn't made an edition of prints in 40 years. My reemergence as a printmaker has been really through monotypes, which I love. I love the experience of creating the image on the plate in an immediate way, but it's ephemeral. So I was challenging myself to make an edition for the first time in many, many years. And then I had very little time to get it done. So I had to work in a medium that would dry very quickly. There was no question that I was going to be making dry pointer etchings, so I had to start with something that was dry to begin with. So the first layer image is digital on fine art paper, then a screen print of the same image, and then fragmented screen prints and wood blocks on handmade paper. And the final bit was really stitched and differences in each. So it's a variable edition. But the biggest challenge was that it had to dry quickly, and that I had to get my head around the idea of making something that had something in common throughout the whole edition, as opposed to making a bunch of one-offs.
Thank you for sharing some of the behind the scenes information there. It's great to hear. Israel, will you share with us any challenges you had with your printing process?
Yeah. So the print that I submitted to the exchange is using a technique that I'm not very familiar with, or wasn't. I'm still not 100% comfortable with it. It's again working with the mokuhanga. So in case you're not familiar, it's working with very transparent colors, water-based ink. So the biggest challenge was just getting the color to align with the key plate, which is the etching. So that took a lot of trial and error. But I knew that I wanted to challenge myself to create something that I wanted it to be as part of my larger body of work. So I think this is definitely in the direction that I want to definitely head with printmaking. And very similar to Barbara, I am a printmaker, but I'm not a good printmaker because I don't really like to edition. I'm okay with just having one. So the challenge was making an edition that was consistent. The upside of that, I definitely feel a lot more comfortable after making it, again, inking the plate with the brushes and then getting the right moistness to the paper. And the other thing that I did, instead of printing by hand using a Baron, I ended up using my etching press. So again, getting the blocks to align, getting everything to align was the most difficult part. But I think the result ended up being very successful, and I'm really looking forward to making a lot more. Very exciting process.
I'm so glad that you're going to be making more. It's fun to, I've been following your Instagram page and just seeing the anthology that you're working on. It has a similar aesthetic. And so I hope that you do. And Amy, can we hear about any challenges that you may have had in the process?
Sure. I think partly because I was working with a new piece of equipment. There were a few technical issues to work out. And I mentioned earlier that Riso printing is similar in process to silkscreen. So the machine makes a stencil for you, and you print one color at a time based on what color ink you've put into the machine. So you can achieve full color images by using a process that the same type of process printing you would use in silkscreen, and divide your image into different colors and print one color at a time. And where the colors overlap is where you'll get your full spectrum of color. And there are a lot of rules for process printing in silkscreen that don't necessarily translate to Riso. The bit that I know about it in silkscreen, there's a lot of recommended orders of which inks you print first and where the angles of your dots align. And with Riso, just because some of those issues are different, the nature of how the machine works is prone to smudging. The ink that you use is oil-based, so it doesn't dry through evaporation. It dries by being absorbed into the paper. So you have a real hard limit of how much ink a single sheet of paper can hold. And so you set up your printmaking, taking some of these additional things into consideration, that you might not necessarily want to print with your lightest color first. You might want to print with the color that has the least amount of coverage on the page. And with the new machine that I was printing with, it was the first machine that we had bought that could print two colors in a single pass. Most machines can print only one. And that led to new problems that I hadn't encountered before, where you're laying down two layers of ink really quickly, that some ink can kind of push the other ink off the page because there's not necessarily time for that to dry in between. So it took a little bit of fussing, but I think it finally worked in the end. And I definitely learned a lot about it that I can use in future projects.
I'm glad to hear that. I imagine we can all relate to that, learning through the process. And boy, it's just so great to hear the wealth of information that exists inside these finished products. So thank you all for sharing about that. All right, our next question is going to be, how does this piece relate to your larger body of work? And Amy, I'll have you start off this question.
So I also mentioned earlier that I have a background in the sciences, and that's a theme that kind of pops up again and again. I've also worked a lot with collage because I like the way that collage translates to Riso. That part of what's great about collage is you can see a little bit of depth between the layers of your piece, but the way translating that to Riso kind of just flattens everything. And it can tend to make things a little bit look even more surreal, which I like. Also, the Riso is really great for unifying everything to a single color palette because you're printing with a limited number of spot colors. So I have collected over the years a lot of old science textbooks, and especially science books for kids I really enjoy. And so it's a motif that shows up in my work over time, but the part of that that's in this piece, I had also collected some flower catalogs that I had been using in some other work. And I came across this image of the white blood cell that just happened to look very similar to the images of flowers that I was also working with at the time. And I thought, like, this is two aspects of nature that, these two things evolved separately. Flowers don't have white blood cells and humans don't bloom, but this shape kind of connects those two things. So that kind of ended up being one of the focal points of the final piece. And also in the bottom was the image at the bottom it was cut from a different textbook of examples of bacteria. And I felt like, wow, the way that they were growing was so similar to the grass in the other image that I used. So I was trying to kind of show these parallels throughout the piece.
I think you were really successful in that. It's great to have that information to point us towards that. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks.
Barbara, how does the print that you made for the eMERGE project relate to your larger body of work?
Well, everything I do is layered and printed and stitched. So in that sense, it's just how I approach every challenge that I'm facing. Often I will create an inventory of printed textures using different approaches to printmaking, and they become changed in the process of being added to textile. In this case, I started with paper. And so that it was both the same and very different. And my biggest challenge was, how do I keep the paper from perforating when I decide to stitch through it? So whereas usually I have a fabric background and I add the printing to that, in this case, I started with the paper and then I literally fused cotton organza to the back so that the paper wouldn't perforate when I stitched through it. So in that way, it stretched me, but it's still very much the same as my approach to any project I do. So printed, layered, stitched.
Great, thank you. And Israel, how does your piece Black Smoke Rising relate to your larger body of work?
Well, I think it's definitely in the direction that I'm working with right now. Just being more conscious about the environment. Everything just feels so immediate in terms of how fast things are changing. I think especially since we live in California, we can definitely see the effects a lot more immediate. So I think that's definitely one of the things that I'm very much mindful about right now. In addition to that, though, I'm also very much interested in incorporating non-Western aesthetics. So I've been working a lot with codex imagery from central Mexico. One of the elements that they've incorporated a lot into their books was the idea of trees as beings. So they had faces and then the plants had faces. So everything essentially had this essence of life, which was very much represented through, again, giving the tree a face. So with this, I also wanted to incorporate that imagery into the piece. So again, it's a literal representation of a tree with a face, but again, it's a standing for all of us. Again, especially in Southern California, where the palm tree is so prominent. It's just our fate if we don't do something to change the trajectory that we're currently heading towards. So it was, again, the combination of that. And again, in addition to the experimentation of the materials, which I very much enjoy. So it's definitely something that fits in with my larger body, very much in that direction.
Thank you so much. That kind of pushes us into the next question, which is, what are you currently working on? So I'll just have you, Israel. Do you want to tell us about your current projects that you're doing?
Yeah. So one of the most important things that I've been working on right now has just been really familiarizing myself with indigenous population in California. So one of the main reasons this arose is because for the last, I want to say 10 years, I've been very much focused with my own background, my own history, again, rediscovering where my family comes from. So recently I was able to find my parents' hometowns in like 16th century indigenous maps. So they had the glyph of the little town. So I thought that was very exciting. Again, just seeing a clear background, I can point to and say, okay, this is where I come from. But then the more I thought about it, I am living in California right now. I am living in LA. And I kind of just came to this realization that I don't really learn a lot about that when I was in grade school. Like, what was here before this giant city came into being? So one of the things that I've been working on is just, again, uncovering the history. One of the things that's very exciting, just seeing a lot of aspects that are very similar to the cultures in Mesoamerica. And so one of the things that I'm doing right now is just connecting the imagery from California to Mesoamerica. And again, I'm doing that with the imagery from the codices. So again, that's one link that we can have. So one of the projects that I just finished was an accordion codex that's vertically. So it's this narrative. Again, it starts from the inception of California, and then it goes into the present and then into the future. So that's the project that I just finished, and then it's definitely something that I'm further developing. So I want to continue again exploring the place that I currently live in right now, and just kind of see what was here before I was here, before everybody else was here. Just to, I think it's very important to acknowledge the indigenous population, and ultimately, I think there's a lot we can learn, because ultimately they were living in this state for 10,000 years. And in the last 100, we've been destroying it, and it's clearly not working. So we need to look at the people who were successfully living here for 10,000 years and definitely look at them for the future.
Thank you, Israel. Where can people see this project and learn more about you and your work?
Yes. So the project that I just completed, you can look through my website, burntwater.chayotepress.com. So that is the culmination of the history of California. The rest of my work is in chayotepress.com.
Thanks so much. All right, let's hear from Amy about what she's currently working on.
That is a good question. I feel like at this point, I'm not sure what I'm going to work on next. I tend to move in between personal stories, personal narrative, and some science communication, maybe less personal, kind of dipping back into my background. So the last project I finished was a guide to bacteria that was really fun to make, and it was kind of a combination using all this information that I knew about bacteria to talk about different forms of color in printing. But before that, the last book I had worked on was the story of my son's stay in the NICU after he was born. So I'm not sure if I want to go personal or if I just kind of want to stay technical, I guess. I feel like there are some interesting stories to tell about the history of medicine, particularly in the context of COVID. But the one way I might go on combining those two ideas was my last laboratory job before I left science was for a small pharmaceutical company. And there's a couple of, I think, both interesting personal stories and technical stories to tell from that time. But that project is really in the early planning stages. In the meantime, now that we have our musicograph printing studio up and running, I take on a lot of work printing art for other artists, both in single prints and also in book form. So it's nice to kind of be able to pick up other people's work and really dive into it. I still feel productive, even if it's not generating new work of my own. So I feel lucky that we've still been able to do that over the last 2 years.
Shoot Studio is lucky to have you. And I hope that your 3-year-old and your cat And the outside work world provides you with some space to pursue those stories that you have to tell.
A 5-year-old now. It's been
5-year-old.
It's been almost half his life. We've been. Time is somehow moving incredibly fast.
Amy, where can people see will you remind me the name of the book that you made with the bacteria? Is there a place online that people can see that?
Yes, we have. So we have a website for our studio, which is shootstudio.com. And we sell some of the work that we've printed and that we've generated ourselves. I also have all of my personal work portfolio and a store. I've been publishing under the name Awkward Ladies Club. So you can find all of my work at awkwardladiesclub.com.
Great. Thank you so much. And then Barbara, what are you currently working on?
Couple things. The other theme I didn't mention that is a sort of a through line in my work is creative reuse. So nearly all of my pieces include some version of something that was on its way to landfill and that I try to rescue. In this print exchange, the puka shells were trash, and the threads that I used to stitch them to the print was also kind of recovered from scrap in San Francisco, and then the final overlay was on scraps of handmade paper. But I did something else recently I call Rescued Reds, which was constructed mostly stitching. It's an installation piece. It's kind of big, all with bits of rescued textiles. And that's hanging now at the Randall Museum in San Francisco, and it'll be up until August with a show called Reimagined, which is full of, all projects by artists who were reimagining what to do with stuff. And then I have a piece that was just juried into a show that will tour starting in May. It'll open at the Peninsula Museum of Art and then tour from there, called Prism Play. And my piece is called Red Violet Riot. And it's made pretty much all on printed scraps of stabilizer paper, again, that I sourced from scrap. So essentially repurposing trash to make a prism panel. And then my website, barbarakibbe.com. And I'm on Instagram, but not really very good at keeping up with it.
So your website sounds like the best place for people to find out more about you and your work.
Yes, or the CSP members site. And
thank you to the artists Barbara Kibbe, Amy Burek, and Israel Campos for joining me today to talk about their experiences as participants in the eMERGE print exchange. Please visit the online exhibition and support each of these talented people to sustain and build their careers. Thanks again to the California Society of Printmakers for the funding that helped make this project possible. And thank you for watching. Please check out the other eMERGE exhibition artist talks available on this channel as they're released. May you be well.